Thank you for joining us for another edition of Policy Gone Viral. I am Sal Nuzzo with Logan Padgett. We are pleased to be joined by Vincent Vernuccio, who is a senior fellow with Workers for Opportunity, a project of the Macinac Center for Public Policy. We're here to discuss labor policy in particular. Vinny, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Sal, Logan, thank you for having me on. Always great to be with both of you and JMI.
Well, let's dive right in. The Supreme Court is now back to 9 justices. A couple of years ago, the court overturned a precedent with the Janus decision. Janus v. AFSCME had a lot of ripple effects in labor policy throughout the United States. Since that time, what have we seen transpire?
Well, it depends if you're looking at a right-to-work state or a non-right-to-work state. In non-right-to-work states where unions could actually get workers fired for not paying them, Janus had a massive effect. Essentially, what the justices in the Supreme Court said was that everything that government unions do, so we're talking about public sector unions here, do is political. And because it's political, public employees have a First Amendment right to choose whether or not to pay union dues. So essentially, it made the entire country right to work for public employees. But now in states like Florida that already had right to work, there was another part of the decision that did affect those states. And we're seeing attorney generals and governors in states like Texas and Indiana, and then even non-right to work states like Alaska, looking at that second part of the opinion and saying that now in order to collect dues, public employers need what's known as affirmative consent, or essentially just states need good bookkeeping to confirm that an employee actually wants to pay dues.
So you mentioned other states. Recently, earlier this year, there was some activity in the state of Alaska relative to this. Alaska is a right-to-work state, as I understand it. And so what were some of the kind of what transpired with Alaska specifically, and how kind of does that translate to possibly the state of Florida?
Sure. Actually, Sal, sorry to correct you. Alaska is actually not a
right-to-work state. That's what I meant. Yeah.
But this is that second part of the decision, that evidence of affirmative consent. Essentially, the Attorney General up there said that in order to collect dues from public employees, you know, and I know this is shocking, that the state actually needs evidence that the employee wants to pay dues. So the Attorney General said that the state needs, you know, several different criteria. And if it's okay, I'll just go through those really quickly. Essentially, please. They need evidence. So the employee has to say, yes, I want to pay dues, and have that evidence go directly to the state, to the public employer. Essentially, the union can't be the middleman, because we've seen cases around the country, especially on the West Coast, of unions actually forging signatures saying people want to pay. So that was the first part. That employees have to be informed of their rights. So, you know, once again, shocking that but before you sign part of your paycheck away, you should be informed that, hey, you don't have to do this, it's not required. That there's a time limit on that. So essentially, Sal, just think of Miranda rights, that, you know, once you're read your rights after you're arrested, that actually expires. That waiver of constitutional right expires over time and has to be renewed. So the Alaska AG said, okay, those waivers have to be renewed. He suggested it could be anywhere around a year that employees would have to re-opt into the union. And then essentially, because this is a First Amendment right, they can get out at any time. So that started in Alaska. Then the governor of Alaska issued an administrative order saying, okay, now we're going to implement this. Then Texas actually followed suit, and South Texas is a right-to-work state. So now here's where the commonality with Florida comes in. Indiana did the same thing, and actually in Michigan, the Michigan Civil Service has done something very similar. So putting those criteria, protecting the choice of public employees to say that you have to be informed of your rights. Employers need that direct evidence of affirmative consent. You can get out whenever you want, and you know, essentially given those waivers. So that's what we're seeing around the country. When we first started the study, obviously it was just Alaska, but more and more state attorney generals and governors and commissions are looking at the full scope of Janus and fully protecting the rights of public employees.
Well, and the reason we wanted to talk to you today was you recently authored an article for our latest issue of the Journal that we released a couple weeks ago, and it largely centered on this concept of opt-in. You kind of already gave us the high level of view of what that concept is, but feel free to explain it further. But why is it important when we're talking to our Floridian policymakers here?
I mean, first and foremost, it's good bookkeeping. I mean, at the end of the day, the state should have evidence directly from an employee. The employee should be informed of their rights, and they should have the ability to periodically make or renew their decision. I mean, especially now with COVID and the pandemic and the economic uncertainty. I mean, really, there is no more important time than right now to give public employees notice of their rights and give them the ability to make a fresh decision. So I know that note of that study actually was two parts. That was the first part. It was, codifying what the justices said states need to do in Janus, and essentially doing, what they did in Alaska, Texas, Indiana, Michigan, the other states. The second part was going further, and Florida has been a great champion and a leader in protecting union democracy. Essentially giving unionized teachers the ability to renew their union and the ability for their union to negotiate for them. Right now, the law in Florida is that if a teacher's union drops below 50% membership, that has to be reported, and then the workers or the teachers get to make a fresh decision on the union. Essentially, should this union continue to represent me? Should we go with no union, or should we have another union coming in? We're about to have a presidential election. We get to vote on the president every 4 years. We get to vote for Congress every 2 years, 6 years, governors, state legislature. Workers should have the ability to vote for their union on a periodic basis. And Florida has done great leadership in that, but there's still more to be done. It should be expanded to more employees. And essentially, instead of a threshold, so we're not looking at, hey, is the governor or the president or the state legislature's approval rating dropping below 50% before we get an election? It should be periodic. So every 2 years, 4 years, public employees should have the right to say, yeah, my union's doing a good job, let's keep them. No, they're not. I want a new union or no union at all.
Well, and beyond that, we are coming up on 2021. While this session is going to look different than sessions in years past, on the policy front, beyond that issue you just mentioned, what else should Florida be examining related to workers' freedom?
Sure. Well, the Macinac Center and Workers for Opportunity, we actually have a full guide of different options for different states. Essentially, it's a menu of options for labor reform. Protecting Janus rights, union recertification, worker voting rights, protecting that union democracy. Those are really big options, and those are probably some of the first and foremost. Protecting union transparency. As we're seeing with the Department of Labor, they're actually updating the union transparency requirements. Union members have a right to know how the union is spending their dues. So being able to go into even greater depth to tell public employees, especially how the union is raising and spending their dues, that's very important. Concepts called workers' choice. Essentially, one of the things that the unions that say is an issue, especially in right-to-work states, and now for all public employees with Janus, is that they have to represent people not paying them. Workers' choice would actually say, you don't want to represent people not paying you, then don't let them represent themselves. Because unfortunately, even with Janus, even with right-to-work, workers are still stuck under a union contract, whether they want to be or not. And they're not able to say, well, you know what? I don't want to simply get a raise for how long I've been on the job. I want to get a raise because I'm working harder, and I want to be rewarded for how good a job I do. Unfortunately, under most union contracts, that's impossible. Workers' choice basically treats unionized employees like almost 90% of workers in the rest of the economy that get to negotiate their own contract. So there is the top 20 state-level labor reforms guide. It's at the Macinac Center's website, Mackinac, M-A-C-K-I-N-A-C. I know we spell things weird up here. .org, and it has a whole host of other recommendations, and we can obviously send those over to the viewers if they're interested. But there's a lot of other things Florida can do. Florida's doing a great job already, but there's always room for improvement.
Well, Vinny, we'll certainly link that in the video too, and as well as the article that you wrote for the Journal. We appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to chat with us on this episode of Policy Gone Viral, and we hope to see you soon.
Hey, thanks for having me on.